Welcome to Spike on It. My name is Dexter Baga and this is Spike number 2. This is a continuation of the Node.js plus Express web app to serverless app learning session. Last time, I wrote a simple phone book app. All it does is displays names with their corresponding phone numbers. Let's take a quick look at the code. So what I have here, I have a route for the homepage. And what it does is we basically mock some data. So we're not really getting data from a database at the moment. So we'll mock it for now. And we simply pass that data into a view, to our index view. So if we look at our index view, all it does is loop through the data and display the name and the phone number in the same line. The code is also available on GitHub on the Spike on It GitHub account, my phone book repo. So my goal for this Spike is to make this data something that is provided to me by an API um, endpoint. Meaning, when I make a request to display the page that shows me the list of phone numbers, the web application is not going to be the one performing the querying or the plumbing of getting the data. It would be another service. It would be hosted somewhere else. In this instance, I'd like to take advantage of the API gateway provided by Amazon. Now, this is a fully managed service. So let's go to the Amazon API gateway page. So it's a fully managed service, which means that if I get thousands of requests, then it will scale automatically for me. I don't have to worry about scaling it. Also, it provides ways to monitor the API usage. It will also provide API version management. So it's a lot of things that I don't have to worry about. So let's get started. I'm going to try to build an API for our phone book. And I'm going to call this phone book. That's the name of our API. Great. So if we go back to our code, um, we are essentially returning this data, which is a collection of phone book entries. So I'll call that API. So we have a resource. So you need to have a resource that you can associate your request. So here's a resource name. I'll just say a list. So we have a phone book, and I'm thinking list. So it's a phone book list. The resource name is the list. So I'm going to create a resource named list. And again, if we go back to our code, this is really just a get, right? So we just really want to get the data. So it's going to be a get method. Now you have other options here, any delete, get, have, post, put, but what we want is get. Save that. And as I said before, the data can come from a database, but at the moment there's really no need for it. We just really just want to get a list of the data. So we will do what we've been doing. We'll just simply mock the data that's going to be returned by this call. Great. So if we test this, and we'll just hit test, So it made a request, it was successful, but there's just no data being returned. So let's just make it return the data. All right, so let's take a look here. So it goes to request. Now we're mocking the endpoint, so there's really nothing here. But the integration response is something that, so when we say 200, we're going to say, hey, I'd like you to return this data. Now the return would be a JSON data. So if we go back again to our code, we had this data that we've been returning. And we can click here. All right. Now this is a JSON format. So let's just do a JSON validator and just make sure that we are passing in the right data format. So let's go validate the JSON. There we go. So this is not going to work. We have errors, so we need to fix the error. All right, so for proper JSON formatting, I think we need to essentially surround this in quotes as well, right? There we go, almost there. Okay, so let's validate this again. Now it's a valid JSON format. So going back to our API gateway, so always want to make sure that the data that we're returning from our application, in this particular case, from this API request, is correct. Then I'm just gonna say save. So now let's try to test it again. I'm expecting the data to be returned this time. Yep, that's pretty good. Great. So next step now is to make sure that this is accessible externally. And what I found out from my previous learning session is that this needs to be published. This needs to be published externally. And all that we need to do is deploy it, deploy the API. It's going to be a new stage, and I'm going to say API. There you go. Stage name is API. Deploy. Good. So what it did is it published it to an API stage. I guess that's just a bucket where you publish it. And it gave us a URL. So if I click on it, obviously, well, it's going to give me an error. But if you notice on this URL, it's really missing the resource name that we really wanted to call. So if we say /list, we get back the names. So that's the URL that we need. We'll keep that for now. So I think that now we can really try to make a call to our API endpoint. So in English, what do we need? So we need to connect, and well, we need to request the data from the API endpoint. Then we will just use the data. Use data to render to page. Okay, so we know that we have the URL that we can use. I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to do it here. There you go. So we have the URL. Now this is going to be an HTTPS request, so we're just going to have to load the HTTPS module. All right. So another thing that we can do um, is now we should be able to make the call to the endpoint, to the URL. Say a request, and this is going to be tps.get, and we need to pass in our URL and a callback function here. Let's this be our response. Okay, so how do we get the data? So all that we need to do is to say that, hey, on data, whenever we get back data, we have a callback again here, and we'll just say it's gonna give us the data. We will simply check if the data contains something. So I'm just gonna check. I'm not sure if this is the best way to check if there's really data that exists. For now, let's do the simple check if it's not empty. And then if it finds data, what I'd like to do is just display it on the page. Alright, so that's gonna do the same thing that it did before. If there's data, it's gonna display it. Now, what's gonna happen when there's no data? I think we can use the same construct here. I'm just gonna say, well, let's just display nothing. There's no data in there. And I just need to, now we don't need this mock data there because we are returning now the mock data from our API endpoint. So now I need to try and run this and see if the page will display the data that we expect it to come back. All right. Well, we are getting a long list of something. So let's go back to the code. Maybe just put a breakpoint here, run the application in debug mode, and refresh this. So what do we have here? It's saying it's a now it's an integer of integer array, and let's see. Well, I have a suspicion that this is really just looks like it's the decimal value of the data that should be returned. But let's double check that really quick. ASCII characters. So there. So it's 91. Square bracket. Then 123. Curly. Okay, well, that seems to be a pattern. Now, 10, I'm guessing that's the carriage return line feed. Which is it is, and then it's followed by 34 and a quote, and the first one is name, so I'm guessing the 78 is N. 78 N. All right, um, so it is simply returning the return value data from but it's reading it as return to us the decimal value. Um, so what we have to do is to tell it, hey, read it, just simple as characters. So let's just set the encoding to UTF-8. Let's take a look if that fixes that. Run the app. Go back to the web app and stop. So I think we're still getting an error. Well, now we're getting the data. Like the actual data now is there. So let's see. Well, this is JSON, but this is literally still a string. It's giving us back as a string. So I think we need to parse that data to JSON. Still, so it's coming back as a string, being read back as just a string. So now we're going to tell it, well, parse it as JSON. And let's see what happens there. Going to refresh this. Great. Hey, it returned back. So let's prove that that's really the correct one. So I'm going to change the phone number of Julie Parks here to maybe a different area code. Let's make sure that that is really changing. Then go back to my integration response here, the mock data, and change it to area code 858. Save that. And I think I still have to deploy that change. Then, and if I'm gonna try, just call it through the browser. Let's see. Okay, so notice the area code changed. So now if we go back to our web app and make that refresh, now the phone number is changed with the new area code. So I think that this is a good stopping point for this spike. So what did we do? So we made our web app. Now instead of having the mock data embedded in the route, we're simply now calling an API endpoint. Um, we're utilizing now the Amazon API gateway to give us back that data that we need. So let's do some cleanup here a little bit. And maybe this. I'll save it. Um, so till next time, keep spiking.